I wrote this book and my own sustainability journey. And it started like many authors in this room with a rejected manuscript. And in my case, it was a story, The Sheep of Luck, which was good luck symbols from around the world. And an editor at Barefoot Books, she liked the story, but sales and marketing, they just didn't think it would work. So the editor offered to meet with me, and I jumped at the opportunity. And she liked the format of the book, which is rhyming couplets, but she just wanted it to be like a different theme. So we kicked around different ideas. And I had been a book blogger for over 12 years, and I had reviewed Barefoot Books for all of those 12 years. And I knew they cared about sustainability because I had just reviewed a book about water and another one about renewable energy. And so I floated the idea of sustainable farms. But like before I floated it, I did this mental check, like, okay, can I think of a few? So can I actually write this book? So Lisa, the editor, was like, oh, I love this idea. And I knew I would have to find more sustainable farms to actually write this book. And that took me down my own sustainable journey. So it actually started with a family reunion in Kennebunkport, and my family from California flew out. Here they are. And of course we took them to a lobster restaurant because it's Maine. And my 3-year-old son decided he wanted to try lobster for the first time. So of course I ordered 1.5 pound lobster for myself and a kiddie meal, chicken fingers for him. And then the lobster came and he ate the entire lobster. I got a single bite and I had to eat the kiddie meal. And then the waitress came by and she asked, how did you like lobster? And we were all the way in the back here, my whole group. My son stood up on the bench and he faced the front of the restaurant and he yelled as loud as he could, I love lobster! And the whole restaurant broke out in applause. Because when you're at Noonan's Lobster Hut, apparently that is the correct answer. So we knew my son loved seafood. He loved raw seafood. So for his 14th birthday, we took him to Island Creek Oyster Bar for oysters on the half shell. And when I was there, I saw this little sign on the wall that taped on. It said, oyster tours available for their oyster farm. And I thought, oh, I'll give him an oyster farm tour as part of his birthday present. So I went to go sign up for the tour, and it was completely sold out. No worries, I waited till the next year, and we got the tour, and we went on this incredible tour of learning how the oysters spawn, all the various stages of how the oyster grows. And the best part of the tour was they take you on a boat, they give you your own shucking knife. They teach you how to shuck, and you can shuck and eat all the oysters that you want, and then you just throw the shells into the ocean. And that became this page. And my next inspiration was from another family vacation in Kauai. We went with a couple other families, and the men would all play golf for days. And then the wives and the children, we would go do outings. And one of our favorite outings was to go to farmers markets. So we were going to this farmers market in Hanapepe, and people might recognize Hanapepe as the home of Lilo and Stitch. And we drove past this like sparkling white salt ponds against this like rust red soil of Kauai. And I asked my friend, like, what is that? And she said, oh, these are, salt farms. And I said, oh, can we go on a tour? Because I love tours. And she said, oh, no. This is like ancient native Hawaiian. It's passed down from generation to generation. It's very private. It's kind of like a community garden. Like everyone has their assigned plot. But then when I told her, I'm writing a book and I really want to include this salt farm, she said, I used to live in Kauai and my neighbor is Native Hawaiian and she gifted me a bag of the salt and I'm going to give you some of it. So she gave me like a big jar, and I made a smaller jar just in case it wouldn't go through security. And I'll pass it around. This salt is, it's not sold commercially, and it's used not just for cooking, but it's used for blessings. So they would sprinkle the salt over like a new home, or like a new outrigger canoe, or new tools. And so when I got my author copies, I took a tiny bit and I sprinkled it on the book to like wish it like to do well in the world. And the salt has a slight pink tinge because they take special earth from Kauai. It's a sacred part of the mountain, it's a secret spot. And they sprinkle it into the salt, and that gives it its faint pink color. And it also adds to the medicinal value because of the minerals of that earth. And so that became this page. And then another inspiration was this free magazine that I would get at like a cheese store called Edible Boston. And I was just reading it, and then all of a sudden I saw this like rooftop garden at Fenway Park. And you know, I live very close to Fenway Park, part of the Red Sox Nation, and I had no idea it existed. So they took basically a rooftop that was unusable, and they turned it into this incredible garden. And they harvest 6,000 pounds of produce a year, which they use in the concessions. And they also use it as a teaching garden. And if you're not from Boston, if you're not part of the Red Sox Nation, many other Major League Baseball teams also have this similar type of rooftop garden. So this became our rooftop garden. And then my final one was my ancestral home, as my mother's side of the family is from Hiroshima. And my mother used to always talk about how beautiful the place was where she lived. It was nestled in a mountain, and it had these ancient terraced rice farms, like rice. And I was lucky in '92 to go to Japan and work for a Japanese company. And then my mother and my sister flew in, and we were able to travel down and go visit our relatives. And these are the actual house that my grandparents grew up in, and the farm that my relatives still grow rice in. And then it morphed into this terrace farm that's set in Chile. And it's a little bit different circumstances because Chile, they don't have as much rainfall, and the earth for the terrace farms is not fertile. So they have to bring the earth from the valley up to the terrace farm to fill the plots. And so they obviously don't want it to wash away from erosion. So they dig trenches so that when the rainfall comes, it slowly meanders through so the water doesn't get wasted. And they actually have a village water monitor so that the water is fairly distributed from the top to the bottom. And because of this, the people that live here, they live this beautiful life where they have plenty of food, so much so that they can even sell it. And so when you think of farms in children's books, a lot of times they look, you know, like this on the left, like a tractor and farm animals and, you know, rows of crops, you know, rows and rows of crops, usually a single crop. But I think we need to think about farms more differently. And for example, this is a farm that's a biosphere, and it's set off the coast of Italy. It's like chained to the seafloor in Italy. And this kind of farm is important because this could be the farm of the future. Because if we were to live in other planets, like Mars, this is what a farm would look like. But it's also really important to remember indigenous wisdom. And this is an example in Brazil, in the rainforest of Brazil. And so the way it works, I call it a fish farm, quote unquote, but when it's the rainy season in the rainforest and the waters recede, the fish follow the receding water, and they go back to their ancestral spawning ground and they lay their eggs. And then the Inawani people, they come, the boys and the men come on like a 2-month fish camp. And they wait until the fish spawn, and when the fish swim back, they build this dam of just sticks, and they weave fish traps. And then they catch the fish and they smoke it, and it's their year's supply of food. And this is like a fish farm because these fish don't grow in captivity. Another example is this circular farm in Senegal. It's because with global warming and climate change, the rain distribution is different now. And so this is a really important way to conserve water. And the idea is you grow crops in circles, and the roots all kind of go to the center, so it needs less water. And it might look like this is an indigenous practice, but in fact, it came out of the COVID lockdown because Senegal was very dependent on outside imports of food and medicine, but then they had to close their borders because they didn't want to spread the virus. So they had to come up with new ideas, and this was one of them. And it wasn't just for produce and plants for medicine, but it's part of this African Greenbelt movement. So this ambitious goal of plantings all across the middle of Africa to stave off the expansion of the Sahara Desert. And then in terms of water conservation, I feel like we have to think about water also as a crop, because it's going to be as precious as food. And so one example in India is an indigenous practice that was forgotten. So they used to have these, the government had to reintroduce it into rural India. And so it's just this idea of, it's called a doba. And it's just a simple idea of a pit, a very deep pit. And then you collect the water during the rainy season. And then during the dry season, you can use that water to get a second crop. But because the water doesn't tend to run out, you can also raise fish in it, so you have another food source. And then as a contrast, in Singapore, we have this super tree grove, and it's kind of a high-tech marvel where it generates its own solar energy, and it collects water and it redistributes it, and it waters the largest orchid and bromeliad garden in the world. But it also uses water naturally to create its own air conditioning system. And so here's another garden that might not come to mind in Nairobi in Kenya. And this is my own personal obsession. This rooftop garden simulates the edge of a forest. And so, but it's deliberately planted. It's like the trees have fruit and the bushes have fruit, and then you have, edible plantings on the bottom. And it's like a complete ecosystem. So you don't have to water it, you don't have to weed it, you don't have to mulch it. And it's called a food forest. And we set it in Nairobi in a city on a rooftop because a lot of kids think that in Africa, everyone lives in a rural village, which is not true. But it's often depicted that way in picture books. And so this hopefully will open minds about what a farm could be and what Nairobi looks like. And so when it comes to introducing kids to sustainability, I think of it as like a multi-part, way. I think we can introduce ideas through books, through picture books, but then I like to pair it with a full body experience. And I feel like it can be as simple as eating something, but it can be very powerful. And I'll give you an example with my own child. And so this is my oldest. She's the Asian girl to the left, or to the right. And she is a rising senior at Rhode Island School of Design, studying industrial design. And she came up with an idea with her friends about addressing the blue-green economy in Rhode Island. And so her idea was to have a mussel farm that hangs off the Block Island wind farms, which is otherwise unusable, like ocean space. And then she would add a seaweed farm underneath, and the seaweed would make it more hospitable for fish to lay eggs. And then it's like this complete ecosystem where the fishermen can harvest the seaweed and the mussels. And Rhode Island was 30% food insecure during the COVID lockdown. So it's another source of food. And also, mussels are incredible. They're the only shellfish that actually can filter out microplastics in the ocean at an incredible rate. And so she and her team ended up winning a lot of awards. And so I think like, oh, was it as simple as eating an oyster on a half shell? And the answer is maybe. And this is another example of just giving a child a full body experience. And it's just simple as my company had, Earth Day. Like, let's have an Earth Day event. So we went to Nahant Beach, which is a small beach in the North Shore of Boston. And we just had a company cleanup day, and one family came with their kids, and they drove all the way from Amherst, which is almost 2 hours one way. And we went to the beach and we looked at it and we're like, this is gonna be pretty easy. It looks really clean. But what we learned was that in every clump of seaweed, there's like little pieces of rope. It could be like 2 inches, 3 inches, 6 inches. You could pull it and then it just keeps going and going. And these ropes break down into microplastics. So we thought the beach looked so clean. We ended up with 27 bags of trash. And it's mostly this rope. And it circles back to the lobster, because this rope is from the lobster pots. So when the lobster fishermen put down their lobster pots, of course it goes all the way down to the bottom of the ocean, 30 or 50 feet. And then it has a rope with a floaty, and the floaty is, identified so the fishermen can see which ones are theirs. But over time, the salt water breaks down the rope, and the rope breaks, ends up in the ocean. Some of it washes up on shore, but if it stays, it just breaks down to microplastics. So it's a whole system that, if you have those mussels, or you pick up the trash, you can remove the microplastics. And so when it comes to sustainability and children's books, I just think, for me, how powerful an idea can be just from a book, and how we can make that experience personalized, full body, so that a child can get an idea and relate it to the world around them. And then if we just sit back and give kids space to use their own imaginations, there's just no limit of what they can do. Because, at the end of the day, that is the power of the children's book. So, thank you so much.